Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, March 13th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the 2024 presidential election, and we're going to talk pretty much just about the closest states, at least from my initial expectations, in the ever-evolving electoral map. Now, 2024 will be met with a new electoral map, one that is different from what we were used to in 2020, 2016, and 2012. If you don't know, every 10 years we have a census, and that census determines the amount of electoral votes and congressional districts that a certain state has. It's not solely for that, but the electoral implications of that are that certain states will gain in terms of electoral presence and also dwindle. For example, the state of New York has been in a constant decline. When Obama was first elected, the state contained 31 electoral votes. After 2024, it is projected to hold 28. After the 2020 census, sorry. The entire region across here has been losing electoral votes. Texas has grown. When Obama was first elected, it had 34. It is expected to have 41 in just 3 years from now. So looking at the electoral map, we are working with a few more states in the competitive column that weren't so competitive in 2020. And now, when I say the closest states, rather than just define it as states decided by less than 5 points, I've actually moved it into states that were decided by less than 3 points. The initial idea of this video was to talk about the states decided by less than 5 points. I actually made a video about that not super recently, but back in January, talking about how 2024 might actually be much more competitive than 2020. And I do think that's true. But in terms of the closest states where I really think it'll come down to these few states, not few states actually, a pretty handful amount, but ultimately the closest ones out of the entire list I think will ultimately determine who the next president or if there's going to be a continuation of President Joe Biden's administration entering beyond 2024. So on your screen is the 2020 electoral map based off all of the states that were won and lost pretty much by 3 points. All of the swing states, all of the safe states, pretty much all of the states in yellow are ones that were won by just less than 3 points. So when you're looking at Nevada, that was actually the state with the largest margin out of all of these states. It was won by 2.4% by Joe Biden. Florida was won by President Trump by 3.4%. So President Biden was able to sweep a number of these states, but not by as large amounts as Donald Trump in Iowa, Ohio, Florida, or Texas, which is why I deem these to be the closest states, at least for right now. I don't think less than 5% is the easiest thing to work with, just because we do see some states around the upper end 4 or 5 points that weren't necessarily as close or as comparable to Georgia or Arizona or Wisconsin in terms of how close they are. But I think less than 3% is a perfect estimate, and it also excludes a lot of electoral prizes, which will be contrasted by the 2024 map, because I already know which states are going to be on the map, but it's just for me to show you at this point. So let's take a look. We already know how many of these states are going to go. There's not going to be a significant difference from the 2020 electoral map. At least off of initial characterizations, we're not going to see a drastically different type of electoral map. Just because, states are very inelastic. They don't shift tremendously from election to election. There are a few exceptions. We'll talk about those entering into this map. But for right now, you can pretty much count on a number of these states remaining the same in terms of their electoral presence and their electoral dominance for either political party. Right now, it looks as if the Democratic Party has the upper hand in many of these states. And these are states that I truly think are not going to be decided by less than 3 points. Things can change, obviously. We're 3.5 years out. But chances are they probably won't, given the state's history. And that leaves, a lot of interpretation for a lot of these 232 electoral votes. Will they be considered less than 3 points? It ultimately comes down to what you will see and what the trends are telling us in some of these states. Now, I'm not going to waste your time with some of these states. We'll get them straight off the bat in terms of initial characterizations. Less than 3% more than likely will not include Colorado, and it more than likely will not include New Mexico or even Virginia. But looking at the rest of the map, I think that many of these states, Democrat or Republican, could narrow down to being less than 3 percentage points. But we'll talk about the states that I think will be the closest out of them all, and then move on to the states that will be decided by larger margins. Keep in mind, 2024 will probably be a different year than 2020. You have to keep in mind that if Donald Trump is not the Republican nominee in 2024, the Democratic Party is going to end up facing a more possibly traditional GOP candidate, possibly someone who's Trump-like, but unless it's Donald Trump, we're not going to see this type of overwhelming support amongst rural voters for Donald Trump or for whichever Republican nominee that there's going to be if it isn't Trump. So looking at the advantage Donald Trump gave to the GOP, it wasn't enough to win the Senate, to win the House, or win the presidency, but it was enough to drive out voters in rural areas that hadn't voted in 2016 or hadn't voted in a long time, possibly Democratic voters before, that ultimately led Republicans to victory on down-ballot races and made Donald Trump the highest vote record for a Republican in United States history. So 74 million votes was certainly breaking records. He didn't even crack, 64 million back in 2016. Joe Biden, of course, holding the record with 81 million votes, but just on the Republican side, Donald Trump was able to get the most out of any GOP candidate in history. But looking at this map, without Donald Trump, we are probably not going to see some of these states that were pretty competitive in the past that ultimately moved over to Donald Trump by large margins. Using this resource, it's map.jacksonjude.com. You can find it out just typing that in the URL, and you can get to this page. But they offer you the ability to compare previous elections. If you compare 2012 relative to 2016, you will notice some very big shifts, specifically in states like Iowa and Ohio and West Virginia and the entire Rust Belt, where we saw Donald Trump do very well amongst rural voters and bringing them out in levels that we had not seen, as well as flipping Obama twice voters. We're talking Obama 2008, Obama 2012, that had not possibly voted for Republicans in the past, voting for Trump and sticking that way through 2020. These states include Ohio, which swung 11 points in favor of the GOP. These states include Iowa, which shifted 15 points in favor of the GOP from 2012 to 2016. 15 percentage points. That's a large amount. Wisconsin, 8 points. Michigan, 10 points. Pennsylvania, 6 points. This entire region, a super significant shift to the right. Even relative to 2020, which was arguably a much better year for the Democrats than 2016. It went from a Republican trifecta to a Democratic trifecta. We still see significant shifts. Even though Biden was on the ballot in 2012 as he was in 2020, the margins were very different. Trump still swung the state of Iowa 14 points relative to 2012. Flung the state of Ohio 11 points relative to 2012. Wisconsin 6, Michigan 7, Pennsylvania 4. And while it's narrower than Hillary Clinton, we see clear trends here that this region had moved over because of Donald Trump. And, looking at 2024, these states could very well be competitive, but I don't know if I'm comfortable enough to say they will be the most competitive. I think the most competitive region will truly be the Sun Belt. I think the Democratic Party is going to do well in Minnesota, enough to win it outside the 3-point margin of the 3-point margin that I'm characterizing as of right now. On top of that, I think Michigan will also be there. Looking at the Michigan result in 2020, Joe Biden won it with 50.6% of the vote to 47.8%. Doing the math, that's a 2.8% difference between those margins. So it's almost there, and without Donald Trump, we're not going to see this stellar amount of support for any GOP candidate. Even if they do try to replicate Trump, they aren't going to resonate with the voters the same exact way, because Donald Trump truly was one of a kind for the GOP, the same way Barack Obama was for the Democratic Party. So looking at this, focusing my attention on the Sun Belt, I do think that we are going to see pretty much Georgia and Arizona hold their positions as the few very competitive, not few, one of the closest and competitive states on the presidential level. Looking at Arizona in 2020, Joe Biden won the state by 0.3%. Looking at Georgia, Joe Biden won the state by 0.23%. Very narrow margins in both of these states, and honestly, I don't think 2024 is going to be the year that changes that. So looking at those 28 electoral votes in total, absolutely, I would say, decided by less than 3 points. Now, if you watched my video this morning, you will know that I said that Florida should not be considered a red state. And while it is a red state based off of this map with the 3%, I think Florida certainly could narrow down in 2024. I don't think it's going to be super solid for the GOP looking at its trend so far. Yes, Donald Trump did well, but that was Donald Trump, and that was based off of rhetoric that did not work for the Democratic Party. Looking at 2024, I can imagine it will return to its traditional swing state status, decided by less than 1 in 2016, in 2012, decided by 3 in 2008, decided by 1 in 2016. Ultimately decided by 3.3% in Florida, but the last time Florida was won by more than 5 points for a Republican was 1988, and the last time Florida was won by more than 5 points for any candidate was 1996. So looking at Florida, I do think it'll narrow down again without Donald Trump on that ballot, assuming he isn't the nominee. And honestly, even if he is the nominee, following that super abysmal approval rating and the Capitol insurrection and the second impeachment trial, I don't think he's going to make a full recovery as if nothing had happened, realistically speaking. Now, I also think that we are going to see the reintroduction of some swing states. As I had mentioned, Iowa and Ohio, I think, are going to be these types of states. On top of that, though, before we get to that region, I want to do that all together, we could potentially see New Hampshire as one of the closer states in this election. The problem is that we are going to see the Democratic Party not hold as large of a grip on the state. First of all, Donald Trump did not have too many kind things to say about the state of New Hampshire. These were comments made in 2017 where he referred to the state as a drug-infested den. On top of that, he's received a lot of criticism by Republicans and Democrats from the state. Ultimately, I think that led him to being defeated here by a pretty considerable amount. If you look at the election results in 2020, if you go ahead and look, in the state of New Hampshire was a 7-point margin of victory for Joe Biden, 7.4% to be exact. So it was a pretty large margin for a state that's traditionally competitive. Keep in mind, Hillary Clinton won it by 0.2%. But I think without Trump, you're not going to see that adverse reaction from these voters, specifically white voters across the country that ultimately removed themselves from voting for Trump as in such a large margin as they did in 2016. Now, looking at this map, the closest states in the 2024 election, I think that this state might actually surprise you. I think the state of Texas could be added in as well. But I'm not going to say the same thing for Nevada. I do not think that this state is going to be amongst the closest states on the electoral map. The problem for the GOP is that the best performing Republican since 1988 was Donald Trump, and he still ended up losing his re-election bid. Think about that. The best performing Republican since 1988 was Donald Trump, and he still couldn't win in 2020. Now, I'm not going to say the Electoral College favors the Democratic Party because we know which party wins the popular vote sometimes and doesn't end up winning the election, but I will say they certainly have some type of advantage without Donald Trump on the ballot, because Donald Trump tapped into a previously untapped group of voters that was very much hard fought by Donald Trump's campaign and Mitt Romney's campaign and John McCain's campaign, but only one succeeded. Even George W. Bush wasn't able to win a single state out of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania in both of his election bids. So looking at the competitive nature, I think they certainly will be close. But do I think that they will be states that will be as favorable to the GOP without Donald Trump? I don't think so. I think just the reduction of minority voters in the inner cities here ultimately bring the state to being very competitive. But, had that shift not occurred, and we're talking about the same populations in Detroit and in Philadelphia, we probably would see the state characterized as blue, at least initially. But for right now, I'm going to say that these states in the Rust Belt, I will say I think are going to be the most competitive states in the 2024 election. And the final state to characterize is North Carolina. I'm actually going to say that the Republicans will do well in Maine's 2nd district, and I think that Nebraska's 2nd district will certainly revert back to being a swing district and something that is very, very close. So far what you're looking at is my estimations for what I think will be the closest states in the 2024 presidential election. This certainly is subject to change. If Donald Trump ends up the nominee again, you might want to throw Michigan into the mix and potentially remove Iowa and Ohio, but certainly keep Georgia, Arizona, Texas, North Carolina, potentially remove Florida. There's a lot of ifs and buts, but as of right now, at least, Kamala Harris or Joe Biden type Democrat versus a generic Republican, I think that we are going to start out with around 173, give or take a few, electoral votes in total that are going to be considered to be states that are going to be the closest out of them all. And, we can do a back and forth comparing it to 2020, 94 versus 173. 2024 truly will be a more competitive year on a national level. We are going to see potentially a return to normalcy in American politics, which also means a return to normal swing states like New Hampshire, like Colorado, like New Mexico. And while I don't think that Colorado and New Mexico will be amongst the closest in 2024, I do think there's the potential for those states to be decided by less than 5 points if the Republicans have the right nominee. So far, it looks as if the Democratic Party does hold some type of advantage, some type of electoral advantage, but realistically speaking, this is just a product of Donald Trump not being on the ballot. But then again, the Republican Party is in that crossroads where they don't perform well if Donald Trump isn't on the ballot, but if he is on the ballot, they probably won't perform well either. It's a very tricky situation. They can get lucky one way or another, not to count out the Republican Party's chances at 2024 entirely, but they certainly are in a pickle here when it comes down to the decision to either keep Trump on the ballot, to prop him up through RNC strategies and to make him a prominent name through 2022 or continuous prominence, or to completely drop him and revert back to the establishment, more Republican, conservative, traditional type of views that were very much reflective of Mitt Romney and John McCain. So ultimately, that is the decision of the National Party, but it looks as if 2024 will start out being a much more competitive national election than 2020, even though, 2020 ended up being much more competitive than we thought. I think 2024 could come down to even more of a wire than 2020 did. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.